U.S. President Donald Trump announcing tonight America's involvement in the war between Israel and Iran. In one of the loudest ways possible, using B-2 bombers, according to a U.S. official.
What was intended to be a regular meeting of the world's most powerful economies turned out to be significantly more spectacular in Alberta, Canada. The 2025 G7 summit, held high in the Canadian Rockies, opened with the usual fanfare: armed escorts, closed-door meetings, and the pledge of a unified front. However, at the end, there were no final images, united pronouncements, or demonstrations of worldwide unity. Instead, the host country, Canada, had done something inconceivable. It effectively ended diplomacy. What triggered the event? President Donald Trump has made a series of strong demands and provocative statements, including a campaign trail declaration in Ohio implying that Canada should have been a part of the United States from the start. That phrase might have sounded like populist bravado back home, but in Ottawa, it crossed a red line. Trump's entrance was not hailed with hope, but with preparedness. But none predicted what happened next. Mark Carney, Canada's former central banker and prime minister, took a choice that surprised even experienced diplomats. He rejected the G7's typical joint declaration before discussions began, declined the group handshake photo, and removed any signs of symbolic unity. The message was clear. Canada would not tolerate its brand or platform being exploited as a prop in what it viewed as economic intimidation. What ensued was not simply political tension, but a stealthy insurrection. Nobody raised their voice. But no one had to, because for the first time in the summit's history, the host country rejected the performance entirely, and in doing so, it revealed something far more deadly beneath the surface: an alliance dissolving in real time. Diplomacy, in its most advanced degree, is a game of symbols. Handshakes, joint communiques, and photo ops give images of togetherness even when discussions are difficult. But during the 2025 G7 summit in Alberta, Canada changed the rules. Before the inaugural meeting began, Prime Minister Mark Carney startled global leaders by canceling the final declaration, an act so uncommon that it had not occurred since the G7's inception in 1975. Typically, the summit concludes with a carefully crafted statement signed by all attending governments, indicating consensus even if it hides dissent. However, Carney terminated discussions before they began. There is no bargaining, no signature, no optics. It was a message addressed directly to the United States, and more especially, Donald Trump. Trump arrived with demands, not conversations. He wanted every G7 country to devote 5% of their GDP to military spending, advocated for higher tariffs, and regarded long-standing alliances as economic transactions. But what actually broke the diplomatic stage was a remark he made during a campaign appearance in Ohio, arguing that Canada should have belonged to the United States from the beginning. In Canadian political circles, the statement was regarded as an affront to sovereignty rather than exaggeration. Carney chose to remain silent rather than express his indignation in public. He removed every ceremonial aspect of the meeting that gave it significance on the global stage. There would be no handshake for the cameras, no last moment of agreement, and no press conference. It was not chaotic. It was about control. This quiet strike did more than simply deny Trump the optics he desired. It also pushed the world to pay attention to what had actually occurred. For the first time, a G7 host utilized the lack of diplomacy to send the loudest message of all. Canada would not be coerced, not even by its most powerful neighbor. While Canada's passive disobedience received attention, it was not the only country opposing President Trump's demands. In fact, Carney's actions appeared to set off a worldwide chain reaction. Around the world, Trump's tough economic policies and militaristic diplomacy were no longer viewed as disruptive, but as dangerous. The G7 nations replied quickly. Just days before the meeting, French President Emmanuel Macron paid an unplanned visit to Greenland. This was not a vacation. It conveyed a planned geopolitical statement. Trump has resurrected talks on seizing the Danish island, describing it as a strategic asset for the United States. Macron's appearance on the freezing tarmac beside Denmark's prime minister conveyed a clear message: Greenland is not for sale, and Europe will not allow Washington to rewrite boundaries for convenience. At the same time, Japan filed a formal protest with the World Trade Organization, accusing the United States of breaking international accords with its aluminum tariffs. Mexico arrived at the conference with legislative remedies in place, ready to face new cross-border economic challenges. Even the United Kingdom, generally America's closest friend, was only granted a temporary exemption from digital trade sanctions, which fortunately ends before the next election season. This wasn't a partnership. It was about containment. Allies who had formerly stood shoulder to shoulder with the United States were now preparing legal defenses and launching lawsuits. Trump's notion of partnership had drifted so far toward economic punishment that the G7's basic foundation, cooperation, was beginning to erode. Throughout it all, the message became clear. The world was no longer ready to accept the consequences of Trump's policies. They refused to grin for cameras while their economies suffered. For the first time in recent memory, U.S. friends were no longer attempting to repair the relationship. They were attempting to protect themselves from it. In politics, visuals are frequently more important than words. President Trump knew this well. He arrived in Alberta anticipating handshakes, trademark moments, and a closing news conference where he could portray the summit as a success. But Mark Carney knew that as well, which is why he disputed everything Trump said. Canada's choice to reject the communiqué was only the beginning. Carney diminished the summit's symbolic potency by declining to engage in conventional picture sessions. There was no final handshake, unified declaration, or moment of faux togetherness. It was a clean diplomatic separation, meticulously planned and flawlessly executed, and it left Trump with only a canceled dinner and an empty podium. Behind the optics, the devastation was genuine. Trump's newest wave of tariffs had a significant impact on the United States allies, including Canada. According to Statistics Canada, tariffs cost the Canadian industrial sector more than $4.2 billion in the first quarter of 2025. 22% on dairy, 10% on aluminum, and 14% on timber. This was not simply policy. It was financial warfare. Trump's main demand at the meeting for every G7 country to spend at least 5% of its GDP on military was met with outright refusal. Carney frankly warned him behind closed doors that Canada will not use its national budget to measure military loyalty. France and Germany supported such viewpoints. Even NATO officials privately acknowledged that it was politically unfeasible. This wasn't just any insurrection. Carney's disobedience was calculated. By refusing to give Trump the platform, script, or limelight, Canada sent a strong message. It would not be bullied into participating in a summit that no longer upheld international norms. In a world when every site conveys a message, Carney chose silence and transformed it into a statement heard across the world. Behind the closed doors and stunning vistas of the Canadian Rockies, the G7 meeting resembled an emergency response unit more than a gathering of global leaders. The typical sense of joint purpose had disappeared. In its stead came silent chaos. Each country concentrated on damage management, attempting to shield itself from the consequences of Trump's unexpected demands. Germany's Chancellor Friedrich Merz came amid heavy internal pressure. German exporters had already lost more than 17 billion euros in trade with the United States this year, and prospects of more levies on industrial items loomed large. Shigeru Ishiba, Japan's prime minister, experienced a similar tempest, coming to learn of increased tariffs and threats of Section 232 investigations against Japanese steel. Claudia Sheinbaum, Mexico's president, arrived with legal documents in hand. Her administration was braced for a possible doubling of border taxes if it would not agree to embrace a U.S.-style asylum system, which Mexico strongly opposed. The United Kingdom won a shaky exception from new digital trade rules, but even that agreement had a countdown clock that would expire in early 2026. Then there was India. Prime Minister Narendra Modi had been invited as a guest, but his arrival created further issues. Canadian authorities opened an inquiry into state-sponsored political violence against Sikh activists in Toronto. That gloom hovered over every side meeting he attended. What was supposed to be a summit of solutions turned into a summit of survival. Nobody was working toward world improvement. Everyone was preparing for economic reprisal, political reaction, or diplomatic catastrophe. The gathering was not crowded with allies, but with rivals, attorneys, and crisis squads. Carney's refusal to issue a final press statement caused the world to view the summit for what it had become: broken. Mark Carney did not slam the podium, make threats, or walk out in protest. He did not need to. Carney sent a bigger message than any speech by refusing President Trump the symbols he desired. No handshake, no joint statement, and no closing press appearance. Canada would no longer participate in diplomacy that exclusively benefited one party. This wasn't just a quarrel about tariffs or defense spending. It represented a shift in world posture. The G7, long a pillar of post-war collaboration, now resembled a splintered group of nations attempting to protect themselves from the very country that had previously led them. And Carney's silence, it wasn't a weakness, it was a plan. A new kind of diplomacy for a new type of crisis. The next chapter of global politics will be waged through trade routes, security alliances, and international tribunals, not with smiles and signings. It will be determined by who can stay firm when unity becomes a performance. And if Alberta is any indicator, that performance has ended. Canada's quiet was not a pause, but a warning, an indication that the old rules are falling down. And whether we like it or not, the globe is approaching a new cold front, one in which quiet speaks and everyone listens.